4:51 a.m. East Nashville, Tennessee. A line of black vehicles moved without sirens down Dickerson Pike. No overhead lights. No radio chatter audible from outside. 7 vehicles total, 3 armored, 4 unmarked, rolling in staggered formation past shuttered motels and the dark windows of a 24-hour laundry. The drivers kept their speed at exactly the posted limit, 25 miles per hour, because nothing draws attention on an empty street in the pre-dawn hours like a vehicle moving too carefully or too fast. They had rehearsed the route twice in the preceding 72 hours, at different times of day, in different vehicles, mapping every sightline and every potential civilian exposure point along the 1.4-mile approach from the staging area on Gallatin Pike. They stopped 200 yards short of a chain-link fence. Behind that fence, 4 acres of stacked sedans, a corrugated steel body shop, and a sealed second-floor office wing that on paper housed nothing. On paper, this was Ridgeline Auto Salvage, a licensed Tennessee business with 3 employees and a junk title on file. The licensing documentation was current. The insurance certificates were filed. The property taxes had been paid on time every year for the past 6 years. From the outside, from the perspective of any county record or state database, Ridgeline Auto Salvage was an unremarkable business in an unremarkable part of East Nashville, indistinguishable from half a dozen similar operations scattered along this stretch of Dickerson Pike. On paper, for 116 days, 15 women had been behind that second door. 15 names on missing persons reports filed in 3 different states. A Clarksville waitress who hadn't shown up for her shift in October. A Murfreesboro dental assistant whose car was found idling on Interstate 24 with the driver's door open. A Kentucky woman reported missing on her way home from a bachelorette weekend in Nashville. Her family had driven that route themselves, looking for her 6 times. The connection that found them wasn't a tip. It wasn't an informant. It was a grocery order. 32 frozen dinners a week, delivered to a business that employed 3 people. That number didn't fit. And in federal work, numbers that don't fit tend to unravel everything. This is how a federal wiretap on a prison contraband line, 90 miles east of Nashville, exposed a captivity operation running beneath a meth distribution network that stretched across Middle Tennessee. 11 defendants, 1 coded phrase, and a single anomaly in a grocery delivery log that a federal analyst flagged on a Tuesday afternoon in late February. By Wednesday morning, the women were out. Here's how it happened. Most federal cases don't start with a dramatic break. This one started with noise in the background. In the fall of 2025, the FBI's Nashville field office and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation were working parallel threads on the same problem: methamphetamine moving through Middle Tennessee at a volume that suggested coordination, not improvisation. Street-level seizures in Davidson, Rutherford, and Montgomery counties had spiked through the summer and into autumn. The product was consistent: same purity, same cut, same distribution packaging. That consistency was the tell. Fragmented supply chains produce variable product. This wasn't variable. Somebody was running a managed pipeline. The difficulty was the source. Every arrest pointed outward: couriers, mid-level distributors, corner handlers, but the chain broke before it reached an origin point. There was no warehouse. No distribution hub anyone could find. The coordination appeared to be happening somewhere agents weren't looking. In November of 2025, the Tennessee Department of Correction flagged an anomaly in their contraband monitoring data at a correctional facility roughly 90 miles east of Nashville. Contraband cell phones inside prison walls are not unusual. What was unusual was the call pattern on one specific device recovered from a cell block during a routine shakedown. The phone had been in use for at least 4 months. It had contacted, according to recovered data, over 40 unique numbers in Middle Tennessee, many of them burners that had since gone cold. The calls weren't random. They happened on a schedule. The same windows, the same durations, the same brief exchanges. The pattern was so consistent that the Department of Corrections Intelligence Unit initially suspected the phone was being shared among multiple inmates. The regularity seemed too deliberate for a single user. When call analysis was completed, it pointed to one cell, one bunk, and one set of behavioral patterns logged by corrections officers over the preceding months. The inmate had been a model of unremarkable compliance. He ate in the common area. He attended required programming. He filed no grievances. He generated no flags. He had simply kept working. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation requested federal wiretap authorization on the prison's contraband communication line. The FBI's Nashville field office agreed to co-authorize. A federal magistrate signed off in late November of 2025. What the wiretap caught over the next 6 weeks was the operational spine of the Tennessee distribution network, conducted openly, in coded language, from inside a prison cell. The man at the center of those calls was a 38-year-old serving the tail end of a 7-year sentence at the facility. He will be referred to here as Dalton Marsh. Marsh had not stopped working when he was incarcerated. He had restructured. The contraband phone was his office. The distribution network outside, built on contacts he'd maintained for years, was his operation. Marsh coordinated product movement through a rotating cast of lieutenants. He used simple substitution language, the kind that sounds like casual conversation until you know the key. Vehicle references for quantities. Weather references for timing. Requests for specific food items to signal location changes. The code was not sophisticated by any technical standard. Any experienced wiretap analyst would eventually work through it, but it didn't need to be sophisticated. It needed to be deniable. A man in prison asking whether his contact had found a good mechanic for his pickup truck sounds like nothing. In context, across a pattern of 60-plus calls, it meant something specific to a specific person in a specific county about a specific quantity of product moving on a specific day. One phrase appeared in the wiretap transcripts multiple times through December and into January. The shop upstairs. It wasn't immediately clear what it referenced. The wiretap analysts flagged it as a potential alternate distribution site. They noted it. They kept listening. I spent time going through the wiretap summary logs, and one detail kept nagging. The phrase, "the shop upstairs," appeared in calls that weren't about product movement. It appeared in calls about logistics, staffing, schedules, and, critically, food. The grocery order anomaly surfaced on a Tuesday in late February of 2026. An analyst at the FBI Nashville field office named Carrie Voss, part of the Bureau's Crimes Against Children and Human Trafficking Task Force, which had been flagged into the meth case because of a pattern in the wiretap language, was cross-referencing business delivery records for properties connected to Marsh's outside contacts. Ridgeline Auto Salvage at the far end of Dickerson Pike appeared on the list as a known contact address for one of Marsh's lieutenants, a man named Garrett Purcell. Purcell had a Tennessee record, theft, receiving stolen property, one prior drug count, and was listed as the salvage yard's registered operator. Voss pulled the yard's commercial delivery history through a lawful business record subpoena. She was looking for supply patterns consistent with a distribution hub, chemical supplies, packing materials, that sort of thing. What she found instead was a food delivery account. Ridgeline Auto Salvage had an active account with a regional grocery distribution service. Orders were placed weekly. The account listed 3 employees. The weekly order averaged 32 frozen meals, plus proportional quantities of bottled water, canned goods, and disposable personal care items. 3 employees. 32 meals per week. Industry expectation for a 3-person operation, 9 to 12 meals maximum, and those would be discretionary, not staple goods, not personal care items. The number was wrong by a factor of 3. Voss flagged the anomaly to her supervisor. The supervisor escalated. Within 48 hours, the wiretap team was pulling every instance of the shop upstairs from the transcript archive and running it against the delivery timeline. The grocery orders had started in late October of 2025. The first missing persons report on the Clarksville waitress, a 24-year-old named in federal records as Maya Reese, had been filed on October 9, 2025. The first order that showed the elevated quantity pattern, October 14th. 1 week after Reese disappeared, the task force pulled the missing persons reports for the Nashville region through the prior 4 months. They found 14 additional women, ages 22 to 28, reported missing between October and January. The cases were distributed across different jurisdictions: Davidson, Rutherford, Christian County in Kentucky, Sumner. No single agency had been working them as a pattern. Individually, they looked like runaways, domestic situations, voluntary departures. As a cluster, they looked like something else entirely. What's striking about this case isn't the scale of the meth operation. It's that the rescue came from a grocery manifest, not a tip or surveillance. 2 investigations had been running in separate lanes for months. The thread that linked them was less than 2 pages of delivery records. Before the task force could move forward on surveillance, they needed to build a fuller picture of who the 15 missing women were, where they had last been seen, and whether any geographic or circumstantial pattern connected their disappearances to the Ridgeline property or to the network surrounding it. That work fell to a 5-person subgroup assembled within 48 hours of Voss's escalation. 2 analysts from the Trafficking Task Force, 1 FBI victim specialist, 1 TBI case coordinator, and a liaison from the Davidson County Sheriff's Office who had personal familiarity with 2 of the missing persons files already in the system. Maya Reese, the Clarksville waitress, had last been seen leaving her shift at a diner on Madison Street at 11:40 p.m. on October 8th. Her co-worker had watched her walk to the parking lot. Her car, a gray Honda, was found 3 days later in a long-term parking structure near the Nashville Greyhound Terminal, keys on the front seat. Her phone had pinged a cell tower on Dickerson Pike at 12:19 a.m. on October 9th. A ping that the Clarksville Police Department had noted in their file, but had not cross-referenced against any commercial property at that address, because they had no reason to. The ping was 1 data point in a file with 40 others. The dental assistant from Murfreesboro, identified in federal victim documentation under the initials RK, 26 years old, had left her clinic on a Wednesday afternoon in early November and was found missing when her husband reported she hadn't come home by 9 p.m. Her car was recovered on Interstate 24 near the Smyrna exit, engine running, driver's door open, her phone on the passenger seat. The phone's last active location had been logged to a tower cluster in southeastern Davidson County. Investigators at the time had treated the scene as consistent with a possible medical emergency or a voluntary departure under stress. RK's husband acknowledged they had argued the previous evening, and that detail had oriented early inquiries inward rather than outward. LM, the Kentucky woman, was 26. She had been driving home to Bowling Green from a bachelorette weekend with 7 friends, all of whom had said goodbye to her in the parking structure of the hotel on Broadway at 11:15 p.m. on a Saturday in mid-November. She had texted her fiancé at 11:31 that she was on the highway. The next cell ping came from a tower near Hendersonville, consistent with her route. After that, nothing. Her car was never found. Her fiancé had driven the entire route from Nashville to Bowling Green himself the following morning. He had done it 5 more times in the weeks that followed, stopping at every rest stop, every gas station, every interchange. The subgroup mapped the cell ping data for all 15 women against the geography of Marsh's known network contacts. 11 of the 15 had last active pings within a 7-mile radius of Dickerson Pike. The remaining 4 had pings consistent with transit corridors that connected to that same radius. None of the 15 had pings anywhere inconsistent with having been moved toward the Ridgeline property. That analysis was the second piece of physical evidence, thin but directional, that supported what the grocery manifest already suggested. When the subgroup's findings were briefed to the task force supervisor on the Thursday following Voss's initial flag, the decision to move to physical surveillance was made within the hour. The task force needed physical confirmation before a magistrate would sign a warrant authorizing entry. The delivery records and the wiretap pattern were compelling, but they were circumstantial. What agents needed was eyes on the property. This is where the first real obstacle appeared. Ridgeline Auto Salvage was not a simple surveillance target. The property was 4 acres of stacked vehicles. Visibility was deliberately poor from street level. The corrugated body shop sat at the rear of the lot, with the second-floor office wing accessible only from an exterior staircase on the building's north face. That staircase was within sight of the salvage yard's front gate, which was staffed irregularly but often. Stationary surveillance from the street would be visible to anyone watching. The task force's solution was to move surveillance to night hours and use a mobile asset, a vehicle consistent with the neighborhood that could pass the property repeatedly without pattern recognition. The vehicle selected was a work van, white, with magnetic signage for a plumbing service, the kind of van that could idle on a residential block at 2 in the morning without generating calls to dispatch, because somewhere in any neighborhood, a pipe is always leaking. Over the next 11 days, agents documented the following: no daytime foot traffic to the second-floor staircase. Deliveries, groceries, water, cleaning supplies, arriving between 1:30 and 3 a.m. at a rear service access. A small generator running on a circuit separate from the main yard, consistent with a sealed interior space requiring independent climate control. 2 individuals observed making the delivery runs on separate nights, one driving, one unloading, both wearing clothing that obscured identifying features. Neither individual lingered. The average delivery window from rear gate to departure was 11 minutes. No one visibly entered or left the second floor during daylight. Aerial observation was considered and rejected. The task force's intelligence unit assessed that any fixed-wing or rotary asset over the property would be noticed by someone in the network within 1 to 2 passes. The neighborhood had enough ambient drone traffic, real estate photography, news assets, hobbyist operators, that a brief unmanned aerial vehicle pass was authorized on the 9th night of ground surveillance, conducted at 3:42 a.m. under low ambient light conditions. The UAV captured thermal imaging data that confirmed heat signatures on the second floor consistent with multiple human occupants. The heat signature count was estimated at between 12 and 18 individuals. The imaging resolution at the authorized altitude was insufficient to determine individual count with precision. 12 to 18. The grocery manifest said 15. The pattern of deliveries in the early morning hours, combined with the sealed-off second-floor wing and the thermal imaging data, was enough. On a Tuesday in early March of 2026, a federal magistrate in the Middle District of Tennessee signed the warrant. The FBI's hostage rescue team was already in position. What stands out in this case is the architecture of these operations, the way criminal enterprises use legitimate business structures not just for financial cover, but as physical infrastructure. Ridgeline Auto Salvage hadn't processed a legitimate title transfer in over 2 years. It existed on paper as a functioning business. In practice, it was a sealed facility operating on the margins of a distribution network, invisible not because it was hidden, but because nobody expected to find what was there in a place like that. The HRT deployment was authorized under a sealed operation brief filed with the Middle District Court. The raid was designated for the pre-dawn hours of the Wednesday following the warrant signing, timed to minimize civilian traffic on Dickerson Pike, and to coincide with the window when the yard's security was historically lightest according to the surveillance logs. Planning for the breach had one significant complication that the after-action reports would later document. The architectural drawings on file with Davidson County for the Ridgeline property were out of date by at least 5 years. The building had been modified, the second-floor wing had been expanded and partially sealed from interior access. The staircase on the north face was the only confirmed entry point. That meant the breach team would have to make initial entry through a known choke point on an exterior staircase, with no element of surprise on the approach. Standard breach doctrine calls for simultaneous entry at multiple points to prevent movement inside. Here, there was only one staircase. The solution the HRT team lead proposed was a 2-stage entry. Stage 1, simultaneous distraction at the main paint booth access point at the building's south end, using flashbang deployment through the roof access panel. Stage 2, tactical stack up the north staircase during the distraction window, a window estimated at 20 to 30 seconds. 20 to 30 seconds. Put yourself in that position for a moment, the HRT team lead signing off on that window, knowing that if anything inside went differently than the surveillance had suggested, 20 seconds might not be enough. The brief was approved. The raid was set for 4:50 a.m. on Wednesday, March 4, 2026. In the 36 hours between the warrant signing and the raid, a piece of the case happened that doesn't appear prominently in the public record, but that the task force's internal timeline documents in detail. One of the 9 unidentified burner numbers in Marsh's call log made a single outbound call from a new tower location, a tower that placed the phone in Davidson County, within approximately 2 miles of the Ridgeline property. The call lasted 44 seconds. It went to a number registered to a prepaid account purchased in cash at a convenience store in Smyrna 11 weeks earlier. That number had never appeared in the wiretap logs before. The task force's communications intercept team flagged the call within 3 hours of its occurrence. The content was not recoverable, the device was not on an active intercept authorization, and the call had already completed by the time the flag was processed. What the team could determine was duration, tower location, and the fact that the receiving number went permanently dark within 6 minutes of the call ending. 44 seconds. A new number going dark 6 minutes later. The task force supervisor made the call to hold the operation timeline rather than accelerate. Accelerating on the basis of a possible compromise risked a confrontational breach if subjects inside had been warned and had time to prepare. Holding the timeline on the assumption that 44 seconds of communication had not been sufficient to fully alert everyone in the network preserved the operational parameters the HRT team had trained against. The decision was documented, justified, and, as the outcome would confirm, correct. The raid timeline held 4:50 a.m., Wednesday, March 4th. At 4:50 a.m., the vehicles on Dickerson Pike went dark. The perimeter teams were in position, 3 vehicles covering the fence line, one at the rear service access, 2 more staged on the cross streets flanking the property. An ambulance convoy from Vanderbilt University Medical Center was staged 6 blocks north, on a side street, engines running. The medical team on standby consisted of 4 paramedics and 2 emergency physicians who had been briefed, under strict confidentiality protocols, on the possibility of multiple victims requiring immediate assessment. They had not been told how many. They had been told to be ready for more than 3. At 4:51, the first flashbang went through the paint booth roof access panel. The sound reached the street. Agents on the perimeter reported later that the concussion was visible. Corrugated steel panels flexed along the south face of the building. The tactical stack was already moving up the north staircase. 3 armed subjects were on the 2nd floor, 2 in a narrow corridor between the office wing and the staircase landing, 1 in a room at the far end. Federal records indicate all 3 were prone and secured within 40 seconds of first breach. No shots fired by the HRT team. 1 subject sustained a minor injury consistent with compliance takedown. The 2 subjects in the corridor had been awake and positioned, not asleep, not surprised in the way a surveillance team would hope for. The after-action report notes this without elaboration. The 44-second phone call the night before is not referenced in the after-action report. The connection is left to inference. The corridor ran past 2 doors. The first was a storage room, empty except for commercial shelving units stocked with the same branded bottled water that appeared on the grocery delivery manifests, stacked 12 cases high, and a sealed plastic bin containing what investigators would later catalog as 43 prepaid mobile devices in various states of use and disuse. The second door was locked from the outside with a commercial hasp and a padlock. An HRT agent cut the padlock with bolt cutters. The door opened inward. That door had been sealed for 116 days. 15 women, ages 22 to 28. The youngest, according to the medical intake records filed with the Middle District Court, had turned 22 in November, while she was inside that room. The federal medical report is sparse, as they always are right after operations like this. All 15 women were transported by ambulance convoy to Vanderbilt University Medical Center beginning at 5:22 a.m. on March 4th. All 15 were treated. The discharge process for the last of the 15 was completed 5 days later. The first hours after the breach door opened were handled by 2 FBI victim specialists who had been embedded with the HRT team, specifically for this contingency. Their job was not tactical. Their job was to be the first voices the women heard that weren't the voices of the network. The specialists were trained in trauma-informed first contact, how to introduce yourself, how to explain what was happening without overwhelming, how to ask the single most important question, is anyone here in immediate medical distress? One woman was. She was the first person placed in an ambulance. She was at Vanderbilt within 19 minutes of the breach. The remaining 14 were moved to the vehicles in groups of 3 and 4, with blankets and water, accompanied by specialists who rode with them. None of the women were asked for statements at the scene. None were asked to identify anyone. The operational protocol was clear: medical first, everything else later. That protocol came from prior cases where victims were treated as witnesses first. The task force supervisor had insisted on it. It is in the operation brief. It mattered. Maya Reese, the Clarksville waitress whose missing persons report had, unknowingly, been the first data point in Carrie Voss's timeline. Her family drove to Vanderbilt the morning of the raid. Her mother had been calling the Nashville Police Department's missing persons line every Thursday for 19 weeks. The Kentucky woman, 26 years old, identified in federal victim documentation under the initials LM, reported missing from a highway rest stop on her way home from a bachelorette weekend in Nashville, had a fiancé who had postponed the wedding twice while she was gone. He was in the Vanderbilt waiting room before sunrise. The dental assistant from Murfreesboro. The woman from Sumner County whose employer had filed 3 separate inquiries with law enforcement. The 2 women from Davidson County whose families had put up highway billboards. All 15. Here's a take that will probably get some pushback. The missing persons system failed these women before the federal case found them. 14 of 15 had active reports on file. Those reports were spread across 5 jurisdictions. No cross-referencing happened for 4 months. A single analyst looking at a grocery delivery log connected what 5 law enforcement agencies had not. It's not a credit to the system. It's a structural failure that this case exposed, and that, as of the filing of this indictment, had not been formally addressed. The arrests came in overlapping waves through the morning hours of March 4th. Garrett Purcell, the registered operator of Ridgeline Auto Salvage, was taken into custody at the salvage yard simultaneously with the HRT breach. 2 additional subjects were arrested at separate Nashville addresses within the hour. Couriers and mid-level coordinators identified through the wiretap logs. 7 more arrests followed through the day across Davidson and Rutherford counties, executed by joint task force teams operating off sealed warrants signed alongside the main raid authorization. Inside the prison, 90 miles east, the contraband phones went dark at 5:14 a.m. on March 4th, 23 minutes after the HRT breach. Federal records indicate the prison contraband monitoring system logged a simultaneous deactivation pattern across at least 3 devices, consistent with a remote wipe or deliberate destruction. Dalton Marsh, reached by prison authorities in his cell at 5:45 a.m., declined to speak. 3 of the 11 defendants were processed through the federal booking system in Nashville before noon on March 4th. The remaining 8 were brought in through the afternoon, one of them arriving after 6 p.m., following a pursuit that, according to the task force timeline, had not been anticipated. A courier, who was not at his registered address when the arrest team arrived, and who was located 2 hours later at a storage facility in Smyrna. He was unarmed when taken into custody. He said nothing during processing. His attorney was present for the initial appearance the following morning. The federal indictment, filed in the Middle District of Tennessee on March 6, 2026, named 11 defendants. The charge list runs to 7 counts: conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, maintaining a drug-involved premises, use of a communication facility to facilitate drug distribution, conspiracy under the RICO statute, and 3 additional counts added specifically on the basis of what was found at Ridgeline, counts the original meth investigation had not anticipated. The RICO filing was significant. It allowed federal prosecutors to argue the operation as a single coordinated enterprise rather than a collection of individual criminal acts. Sentencing exposure for RICO conspiracy in the Sixth Circuit routinely runs to decades. Several of the 11 defendants faced exposure in excess of 20 years. Bond was denied for 8 of the 11 at the initial appearance. The court found that the documented scope of the operation, combined with the sealed nature of the facility and the duration of what had occurred there, constituted a level of flight risk and danger to the community that no bail condition could mitigate. The methamphetamine recovered at Ridgeline Auto Salvage and at 3 secondary locations raided the same morning: a storage unit in Antioch, a rental property in Smyrna, a commercial lot near the Murfreesboro city limits, totaled a quantity that the indictment describes in aggregate as sufficient for distribution at the retail level across multiple Middle Tennessee counties. The Antioch storage unit alone yielded sealed packaging material and a digital scale system consistent with commercial-level distribution preparation. The Smyrna rental property contained financial records, handwritten ledgers, not digital, that wiretap analysts said were consistent with the coded accounting language they had been tracking in Marsh's call logs for weeks. Those ledgers were entered into evidence. They are among the prosecution's primary financial exhibits. What the case does not resolve, and what no public filing has addressed with specificity, is who supplied the network from upstream. The wiretap evidence establishes Marsh as the operational coordinator for Middle Tennessee distribution. It does not establish who supplied Marsh. Prosecutors have described the supply chain as a continuing area of investigation. That description has not changed since March. The case file was transferred jointly to the FBI Nashville field office and the Bureau's Crimes Against Children and Human Trafficking Task Force. The task force designation, adult victims, meant the investigation would continue in parallel with the criminal prosecution, with a separate federal unit conducting the victim services coordination through the recovery process. One detail that stayed with me after going through the case materials, the generator. The surveillance team had flagged it in their logs, a small commercial generator running on a circuit separate from the main yard. When HRT entered the second-floor wing, they found the generator had been powering a climate control unit and a bank of overhead lights on a timer. The lights ran from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. A timer. Someone had set a timer for the lights. That mundane detail is what stays with you in the case file. Not a dramatic operational feature. A timer on the lights. The kind of decision that takes 30 seconds and a hardware store purchase. But it implies something about sustained, deliberate management. Would you have seen it? The neighborhood, the missing persons reports scattered across 5 counties. Probably not before the grocery manifest connected them. Most investigators working any single thread wouldn't have. That's not a failure of effort. It's a failure of architecture. The Ridgeline network is dismantled. The 11 defendants are moving through the federal court system in the Middle District of Tennessee. As of early July of 2026, 4 of the 11 have entered preliminary plea discussions with federal prosecutors. The remaining 7 have indicated intent to proceed to trial. Dalton Marsh's sentencing exposure, according to the indictment, spans the meth conspiracy counts and the RICO filing. His trial date had not been set as of the most recent court filing. The contraband phones inside the prison were never fully recovered. Federal investigators identified at least 3 devices from the call pattern that were either destroyed or moved before the facility-wide search could locate them. What those phones may have communicated in the 23 minutes between the HRT breach and their deactivation is not established in the record. There are 2 open questions the indictment does not resolve. The first, the distribution network that Marsh operated through Ridgeline had been running, by the wiretap evidence, since at least the spring of 2025. The October start date for the elevated grocery orders at Ridgeline is the earliest confirmed date for what happened on the second floor. But the analysis team's annotation of the wiretap transcripts includes coded references to the shop, without the modifier upstairs, going back to April of 2025. Whether there was a prior location, prior to Ridgeline, has not been established. Federal investigators described this thread as ongoing in a March filing. The second, 9 of the 40-plus burner numbers identified in Marsh's call log have not been matched to named individuals. Those 9 numbers went dark in the weeks before the raid, not on the morning of March 4th, but earlier, suggesting someone in the network became aware of federal activity before the warrant was signed. How far in advance? How much was moved or concealed in that window? Those questions are open. What the case does establish is this: 116 days, 15 women, a grocery manifest that didn't add up by 20 meals per week, and a federal analyst who noticed. The demand that created Ridgeline Auto Salvage will outlast this indictment. The second-floor office wing above the paint booth has been sealed by federal order pending the completion of trial. The salvage yard's business license was suspended by the state of Tennessee on March 5, 2026, the day after the raid. The sign on the chain-link fence at the far end of Dickerson Pike still reads Ridgeline Auto Salvage. Nobody has taken it